Welcome to another Coffee with Samso. Here today we're at the UWA Club here at University of WA in Crawley on a very, very wet and windy winter's day. We're talking with Florence Drummond today here from IWIMRA. I've got that right. And it's a fascinating topic. It's sort of probably go in conjunction with our last conversation with Cato Mule. But Florence, welcome to Coffee with Samso. Look, you know, it's a really nice topic. I reached out to you on LinkedIn, and I'm glad you accepted. Florence, just let us know who you are, and let's have a chat.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much as well for having me here. It's always, the power of networks, right?
Yeah.
I'm making friends and using a great platform like LinkedIn as well. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm here on Wajak country. I'm a Dara Wuthathi woman from far north Queensland, which is pretty much on the other side of the country. But no, I've been here for the last 2 years, which has been lovely. So IWIMRA, yes, it's the Network for Indigenous Women in Mining. We started that platform a few years ago. I was an operator in mining, so that was my first introduction to mining at Rio in Weipa. And then from there, we really created a conversation around Indigenous women in particular, and what our circumstances or our experiences were with mining. So this is it, really.
Yeah, I guess, I've sort of been in exploration in the, long time ago, and it's a topic that's sort of was not even talked about, but now it's well talked about, but it's gone a long way since those days. And women in mining, then you got Indigenous women in mining. It's a topic that's, I guess not talked about often, but from your point of view, I guess women in mining is one issue, then you got Indigenous women, right? So how do you view those two obstacles today?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I guess a nicer term of that is intersectionality of Indigenous women or people. So when I first started this conversation, or when I was really curious to learn more about it, I thought, well, how do I do this without segregating further? So that was my biggest concern when I first started talking about it. And honestly, when I first started talking about it, I didn't know what I was talking about, I was telling people my story, and people were actually interested in my story. So for me, my own professional and personal development around this conversation grew very quickly. So for the last 3 years, it's been an evolution of the story, of the narrative, of Indigenous women, of women in the mining and resources sector. So yes, statistically, I guess I can share a little bit like that. Back in 2016, there was recorded 2,400,000 people in the mining and resources sector. This is from the census. About 6,600 were Indigenous people, and about 1,300 were Indigenous women. And so to add to that as well, to give you a bit more of an illustration why it's important to understand our demographics, is that up to 60% of operations is within local areas in terms of talent pools, in terms of employment opportunities for Indigenous people. So we really need to understand that relationship, how complex it is, but also the opportunities as well with that. So,
in terms of the mining industry, I remember Cato telling me that in his world, he was one of the very few from his sort of generation that did go to universities and things like that. So that's a cultural change, a generational change in that sense. How are you seeing that compared to, say, maybe Cato's time and what it is today?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great point as well, because relationship with mining and engagement with mining and Indigenous peoples is contextual. That's the biggest thing that we had to learn for myself as well, is coming from Queensland and coming from a different operation is very different to what the experience is over here in the Pilbara, for example. So in terms of generation as well, we still definitely have similar histories in terms of compounded disadvantage and all those hurdles that we have historically, but now it's when we're moving forward, how to ensure that we're all talking from the same point of view, and that we've all got everyone's point of view in the conversation more than anything, so we can start to deal with things together as a community as well, which is important.
It's an interesting topic because I come from the Southeast Asian culture where it's academia over everything else, and
yeah.
I think if you look at Southeast Asia, the way things work is that academia is how you move forward in life. If you took up a trade, it was lesser However, when you come to Australia, trade is a big part of how we live. Trade is, you can move, you can do a lot with that.
Yeah.
Is that from your culture, or generally? We're speaking in generalities here. Is there like that difference for us?
Yeah, it took me a very long time to value education. I did not value education. I was sent to a private school. I grew up on Thursday Island, so I went to a community school there. There's only about a few thousand people that live there. My parents then sent me away to boarding school because they could see the value of education. I, at the time, didn't. I was there, as you do as a kid, just kind of went to school and kind of got away from your parents. But even after that, I didn't quite know what to do. And I just followed the easy pathway. I was in hospitality for a very long time. I attempted university a couple of times, still didn't succeed. But more than anything, I couldn't see the long-term value that education would bring to me at all. Now that I'm in an industry that's rigid and traditional, these things are required. And so I think for me now, at a later time in my life, these things are valuable, but the pathways aren't often clear enough. So one of the things that we have in terms of one of our goals is how do we make education accessible? And one of the best things about COVID is now made education accessible through internet. So, education packages and all these courses that now people can start to upskill, whether it be through micro-credentials or, diplomas or anything like that. It's much more friendlier to access as well, which is good.
Before we recorded, you talked about where you've been, United Nations, things like that. I find that quite interesting. Can you share with us, your experience on those trips and who you met?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So as an operator, so this is me. I was a truckie. I was in the bush. I lived residentially as well in a town that had a few 5,000 people. Right. So I was physically isolated. I didn't know what was happening in the big bold mining world or the big government policy world. So again, with this conversation, when it first started to open up and to be shared, we had a lot of interest with a lot of people around Australia. And I was really surprised and, scared at the same time as well, because I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to speak English properly, and all these things. And there's a lot of pressure and demand for me to think about what am I actually going to do with this now as well? So yeah, I started to get invited to a lot of conversations and a lot of influential people. So these were all amazing experiences. The best thing about being in the industry was that I could afford to go to these places. I could say, yes, I can come along and I can pay for my own way to get there. So that was the biggest point of difference for me. I never had to apply for any funding or anything like that, which was amazing and empowering at the same time. So I could show up for myself, for the network, and to conversations, which was awesome. A few incredible trips away. So I went to the UN CSW, which is in New York. That's the Commission of the Status of Women. Usually pre-COVID, up to 10,000 people would attend this event globally. So again, for me as a truckie in the bush, like going to this amazing city, being New York, and seeing snow, because it was snowing at the time as well. Okay. But being part of conversations that you wouldn't even think about. These conversations influence national policy, communities, and everyday things as well. So that was that, and then also was fortunate enough to go over to Bangkok as well, as part of the UNSCAP, which is a Asia Pacific coverage, but actually on the official Australian delegation. So I was with people who were representing Australian government, which is incredible. As an operator to have done that, it's amazing. So,
how do you feel that now that you've done that, and obviously it's very important, and I sense that you the fact that you were a truck driver and now here, and you've gone there, and you're now in a role where you're trying to instill that women or Indigenous women come forward and do the things that they should be able to do, but they don't because of whatever it is. How do you think that experience by seeing, I used the phrase seeing the world, help you in your role today?
Yeah, and that's such a great question, because I often think about that as well, because I think about my values and my drivers, my own personal drivers, my business drivers, what I want to be and do. And often that's not aligned to everyone, and I needed to accept that as well. Like, just because I went out and I did all these amazing things doesn't mean everyone wants to do
True.
it, you know?
Yep, that's right. That's right.
But then when I really wanted to kind of bring it down to was like, I had to think about, well, how do I actually connect our network together? What's our common or shared value that we can really talk about? So I really found that the things that matter to us as most as Indigenous people or Indigenous women, we look at our social hurdles, right? We look at poverty, we look at incarceration, we look at suicide, we look at all of these things, all these really fundamental challenges that impact us at a very, very personal level. So to shape the conversation to say, well, you know what, if we continue to participate in these conversations at a national, global level, we can certainly make a difference on the ground as well. We can take ownership of that narrative and actually say, well, you know what, I'm in an industry that pays the most for any women out of all industries. How can I start to invest my wealth in different ways that I can build my own wealth status? And also, secondly, how do I actually impact my community as well in terms of the social hurdles? So, you know, making change that really actually matter to us.
I remember when I was talking to Cato and I asked this question, how there's a narrative, a very generative, presumed narrative in the industry. I'm talking about our minerals industry. Yep. That there is a clash between what the Indigenous people want and what the companies or whatever want. But you know, he put it in really well. Everybody understands where things that you want come from. So that is just doesn't exist. Everyone's got to coexist. You can't have one group saying no mining, blah, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not real, right? So when we talk about your, I mean, we're specifically talking about women, because women come from a culture of stay-at-home mums and things like that. And I know with many cultures, that's deeper than in a Western culture.
Yeah.
How big an issue is that when you talk to the women, to the young girls, and then you got the mother influence? How deep is that issue?
Definitely, and I feel with that as well, that is a challenging conversation for us to have, because we're really trying to articulate or define how we are as Indigenous women and how we provide for our children and our families in this day and age, and what we have in our communities or what's around us. And so what I've really learned over the past few years, not only just in Australia, but from a global level, like, women absolutely do have an important role to play in our families. But it's also around as well, how do we continue to provide from, you know, using the different elements or using the different industries that we have around us. So for us, and also that brings about different challenges as well, you know, for women now to go out and to work, that of course can sometimes ignite challenges in the home front and all of those things as well. So it is a fine balance, but what I find is that it comes down to survival as well. It's about that financial empowerment or building that wealth, that base wealth, so that we can all continue to grow as people who've been deprived of many things for a very long time, but how can we start to use now what's in front of us to get better? In terms of the understanding between industry and Indigenous peoples, what I have found is that it's that shared value or that correct alignment of what is valuable, because yes, we are all in it together. We do find value to some extent, and I think it's more around education to say, well, what does the supply chain actually look like? How do we make that more transparent so people can relate to say, well, actually, no, I've got a phone, and that phone came from somewhere, right? Or I wanted to send my children to, you know, to STEM schools, and so that STEM school is going to contribute to something greater. So I think it's more that alignment of understanding and values where people need to understand a little bit better on how we can continue to innovate more than anything.
But in these current times, I mean, in present times, is it easier to have that conversation? Then I'm making an assumption. It's easier now than say 30 years ago or 50 years ago, whatever. But is it for yourself? Do you find that conversation getting easier? Yes
and no, actually, because, you know, with globalization, digitalization, everyone's got access to information now. What that does also bring is greater greater opportunities to voice things, right? To be visible, to be active in the sense that, you know, this is what I believe in and this is what I'm going to share with everyone. So yes and no. Yes for us in terms of remote access to education, so we can start to upskill and upgrade and grow and be still relevant in the industry. But secondly, no as well, because then it starts to bring about more communities of I guess, active conversations that can sometimes be very kind of like charged, you know what I mean, like emotionally charged. So then sometimes you know, people don't want to listen about what the opportunities are.
And then so for going forward with the, you know, IWIMRA, I'll get that right. What's the future? I mean, what's your plans? What's your aspiration for getting things done?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, starting and speaking from a women's perspective, which was culturally safe for us to do so, was always about raising the profile for Indigenous women in mining and resources. And so we really found that alignment with women globally as well. And then of course the fellows in our community was like, well, what about us? And we were like, well, why don't you make your own group or something like that? But we've just recently established our non-for-profit about a month ago. And so that'll be for peoples in mining and resources, Indigenous corporations. So it starts to then invite all stakeholders into the conversation. So that's probably our aspiration, is to be the hub for Indigenous stakeholders in industry to do with mining, resources and extractives, because we are now developing or expanding our network internationally as well, which is exciting.
Okay. I mean, Kathy Freeman, when he did that run, and every sort of Indigenous sports people sort of says that inspired them, and I think it's the same. Everyone has someone that inspired you. My daughter didn't like swimming, and for some reason she watched the diving one Olympics, and the next thing you know, she loves the water. Right? So is that kind of role model factor something that can work for, let's say, your organization, that to encourage Indigenous women to get out there and do things and see the world, and, you know, not just be in the home community, but not Sydney only, but New York and London, things like that?
Yeah, 100%. And I believe that it's done through experiences more than anything. So now that, you know, the first couple of years, it was me going away and doing things and kind of like feeling at the space and making sure that it's safe as well. What we've now really tried to do over the last 2 years, I know last year was a bit of disappointment around COVID for everyone that was traveling, but we had planned, or we had found sponsorship for 20 women to join us over in New York for the CSW. Okay. So that was our action and our commitment and our responsibility to inspire women through experiences more than anything, because then that woman will go back to her family, to her community, and she will just be talking about her amazing experience away with us. And that is influence that we're really focused on. So this year as well with IMARC, that exciting announcement for us to be the inaugural First Nations partner to this mining event, which is amazing, history making, all these things that are, you know, we've worked really hard for. Again, we're going to bring a bunch of women down with us to experience what the mining and resources conversations involve, what new technologies are about, and also the power of networking as well. So,
I think it's a cultural thing, right? Culture has a very deep roots, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, and when you want them to break out of that, it tends to draw them back a lot, and it's that safety net, right?
Yeah.
I know in our sort of Asian, Malaysian culture and things like that, and you made a mention that your great-great-grandfather actually came from Sarawak, which is my home state, which is good. You know, I'm more connected to Australia now than ever. Is that something that you keep feeling that we need to break that, or drag people out of their comfort zone?
Two things to that as well. So yes, there's a couple of things there that I've really had to actively be mindful of, is that to make sure that we bring everyone along, because lateral violence is a big thing, you know, when people think, oh, you know, you think you're too good for us now, or just because you went to boarding school, or just because you think, you know, all these things start to bubble with people that quite aren't involved, right? So the biggest thing for us is to bring as many people along with us. So whether it be through Indigenous women who are with us in operations, or Indigenous businesses as well. So really trying to showcase and utilize our platform to bring them up as well. And to never think that we're better than each other. So that's kind of something that we're really, really strong on, is that to make sure that we always pull each other and, pull our heads in and keep us in check when we're thinking that, our ego gets the best of us or anything like that. We're very grounded and, very strong with our culture and our cultural beliefs, and we talk about it often. So.
But sometimes the perception that you are better than them, which drives that more than you are actually feeling that.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you realize, the reservation is because they think you think that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember talking to Mark Anderson from Fish.
Yeah, amazing.
And I was talking to him about the businesses, and we made a point to just talk about the business point of view rather than thing. But he said, there's a cultural thing that everybody needs to understand first. And he went on, and we had a wrist to talk, and we had a nice long chat. And I think that was quite a good chat. For anyone that hasn't seen, definitely go online and Google it. He did spend a bit of time just talking about the cultural reasons, the reason, and why the Indigenous sort of population think certain ways also, and everybody needs to move beyond that to go forward, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Culture and family is just core to us, really, and that's why we see some of the things that we see in the industry around retention rates. Family being our biggest investment and our biggest reason to stay or to leave a job or an industry. It's core to us, and it will always be there with us, which is amazing. So
it's like us, when we first came here. We all took our shoes off before we went into the house.
Yeah.
And all my Aussie mates would come in with their shoes, and my mum would going, "What's going on here, boys?" So it's just simple things like that you don't think of, but just because they're not being rude, it's just that they never thought about it because it's not the done thing, I guess.
Yeah.
Look, Florence, it's fantastic. I mean, to have a chat. I'm really glad. I was looking forward to this conversation. What's anything that you want to share with us that we haven't touched on today, that you're thinking of, or maybe we should touch on that topic?
Yeah, I think we've had a really great conversation, so thank you so much for the opportunity. But I think more than anything, in moving forward, there is a lot of excitement around green energy and around, where do we fit as Indigenous people, Indigenous stakeholders in this new phase of, where we are going as an industry. So I think always reminding people who are out there, investors, companies, that Indigenous engagement will always be important. So there is definitely still reason to continue to invest in that part of the the supply chain in the sector.
Oh, that's a good topic for the next conversation. We won't muddy the waters here with that one, but I'm looking forward to. Well, I'll look forward to maybe another time when we can have another conversation. And I think ESG is another topic that's sort of hot on everyone's lips at the moment. But again, thanks, Florence. Till next time.
Thank you very much.
All right.